Zeno was a Greek philosopher that was famous for his paradoxes. A paradox, as you know, is a contradictory statement, so a statement that contradicts itself. And many philosophers after Zeno had a lot of fun with his paradoxes, and I'll walk you through one of my favorites in this video. So imagine, first of all, that you need to drive, let's say 2 miles. Say you need to drive 2 miles down a highway to get to the grocery store. So maybe this is your house, and maybe this is the grocery store, and this whole distance is a distance of 2 miles, okay? So Zeno would argue more or less like this. Before you drive all the 2 miles, you need to drive half of this. So you first need to drive 1 mile. So let's call that 1 mile. So I'll call this x1, 1 mile. So this is like my first distance. Before I drive the 2 miles, I have to drive the 1 mile. Okay, the next step would be to walk the remaining mile, right? The second half of this line. But then Zeno would argue with you that before you walk the remaining mile, before you drive the remaining mile, you need to drive half of that. So you need to drive half a mile, all right? So you get something like this. So x1 plus x2 equals 1.5 miles. So it's how much you've driven so far. Next, he would say, well, if you want to drive the remaining half a mile, first you need to drive, half of that, so 0.25 miles. And then you'd get something like this. x1 plus x2 plus x3 is 1.75 miles. So far you've driven 1.75 miles. You'll still have 0.25 miles, a quarter of a mile remaining. So Zeno would keep stopping you, and he would argue, okay, it doesn't matter how much you need to walk or drive in that case, I can stop you halfway to say how much is missing, so you never arrive. That would be Zeno's argument. It's very subtle, very difficult to come up with, I think, but he used it to prove, in his opinion, that movement is impossible. He would say an arrow never hits its target, because if it did, before it does hit the target, it needs to travel half the distance. And before it travels half the distance, it needs to travel half of that. So he would keep this argument to say that there is no way that something moves, that movement overall is an illusion. Of course, this is not true, but this is an important idea, an idea that takes you and helps you think about limits. So I want you to reflect about this last expression. If you are able to add all of the distances, remember there's infinitely many of these, so he can stop you however many times as he wants. So this means it's a very, very long, or an infinite sum. If you were able to add them all, then we would get 2, which is the entire distance of 2 miles. Okay, this takes you to the idea of series. We're not going to study series in this class, but the idea of limit can be expressed to explain this as well. So this is Zeno's paradox.